Hello everyone and welcome back into yet another week of shows here at the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning into today's show, but we do have to begin with some bittersweet news from me. Unfortunately, not only will this be yet another week of shows, it will be, in fact, my last week of shows with the GSMC Sports Network. It has truly been an honor to be one of this great network's hosts, and I hope that in the very near future, a lot of you guys who have followed my journey with the network will continue to follow my journey wherever I may go. I appreciate all the hours you have spent tuning into my shows, whether it be with the Fantasy Sports Podcast and now at the Dead Ball Sports Podcast. I truly do appreciate all the time we spent together, all the lovely comments you have left. But it is what it is. I am moving on to pastures new, and hopefully I will find a new audience as well as some of you guys sticking with me for the journey. It's truly been a great ride thus far with GSMC, and I hopefully may get a chance to come back, maybe as a guest, so you never know, but I do have to deliver that news to you in advance. But we have a great week of shows regardless of that sad news, and we're going to end strong my tenure at GSMC. And for our Monday show, we'll be doing an interesting segment here where we discuss all the best players at each position in the MLB, starting off with the catchers. Then we'll be looking at the top cut and franchise tag candidates in the NFL. Then we're going to play a little bit of buy and sell in terms of big college basketball questions ahead of the NCAA tournament, and then concluding with a big game with huge stakes in terms of Champions League placement and in terms of who will finish behind Liverpool most likely in the Premier League title race between Nottingham Forest and Arsenal. Two teams kind of in weird form. So if you are a footy fan, stick around for that. But without further ado, before we get into any of our show today, I do want to remind you, as always, to like, follow, and subscribe to the network if you haven't done so already. Avail yourselves of the Super Chat, Super Thanks, Super Stickers features, as well as our website, gsmcpodcast.net. Contribute, interact with the show a little bit more directly. Without further ado, let us jump right into our first show of my last week here on the GSMC Sports Network, starting off with the top backstops in the MLB for this upcoming season. Now, a lot of things had to be taken into consideration, right? Because catching is one of the more intriguing positions in all of sports. Not only do you have to have plate discipline, framing discipline, but you also can be one of the more talented bats in your team in any given moment. A lot of these guys you might consider to be more defensive-minded than big offensive bats. And then there are some guys where you say, well, their framing capabilities, their defensive aspects of their game may be lacking behind. But overall, this is a fluid list of players who combine elements of both within their game. And whether or not they had the best season last year, I truly think that this list is a microcosm of what the position has become and where it's heading to. So without further ado, let's jump right into it, starting off with number 5 of the Houston Astros. It is Mr. Yainer Diaz, a true middle-of-the-lineup guy in terms of his offensive prowess. Batted .299 last year, and in a Houston Astros lineup that's not necessarily going to be predicated on power this season. There's a lot of hitters for average in this lineup. They added Isaac Paredes and Christian Walker. A lot of defensive talent there, but more average kind of hitters when it comes to their offense. So look for Yainer Diaz to actually be a solid middle-of-the-lineup catcher that's not necessarily reminiscent of catchers in the past where you saw them batting towards the end of the order because they weren't the best bats. Yainer Diaz, I believe, will be one of the best bats on this team, but not just one of the best bats on this team. He's going to have a large role to play in how pitching will be able to carry this Astros team. A lot of young guys still in this pitching rotation. Ronel Blanco is only in his second year or third year, I believe. Arrighetti as well. And those are two guys who you're expecting to carry the load in important moments for Houston. So Yainer Diaz is going to have a lot of responsibilities behind the plate as well as what his bat can do for this Astros lineup. So look for him to have a very intriguing season, both offensively and defensively, and maybe combine the best of both worlds to continue to keep the Astros in the AL West conversation. Then, at the number 4 spot, this is a guy in Will Smith who I believe is a little bit underappreciated just because of the depth overall of this Dodgers lineup. Not just, at the catching position, where I feel like he is an anomalous kind of player. Because I don't necessarily view the Dodgers as a catcher-heavy team. Will Smith is their number 1 catcher, and they really love him for it. Now, in terms of framing, in terms of his behind-the-plate capabilities, he's certainly not the best. In fact, he ranks last in terms of framing runs, I believe is the stat, at -10 last season. But an interesting stat to know about Will Smith, an interesting stat because he is an LA Dodger, most importantly, is that the man can hit 4 straight seasons, tied with JT Realmuto for the most such seasons for a catcher, with 19 home runs and 75 RBIs. You don't necessarily think of this guy, Will Smith, as a power hitter because the Dodgers lineup is full of players who can hit for power and average. But that's just what Will Smith can contribute on the offensive side. Yes, he might have to improve defensively, but I think that he's a true clubhouse guy, a personality guy that can bring this team together. And that might be what matters most when it comes to a guy like him on such a loaded Dodgers team. Then at number 3 overall, we have Cal Raleigh, perhaps the biggest bat in this list in terms of his power. And he might just be the best hitter on this Seattle Mariners team. I know they have Julio Rodriguez, but I really think that Cal Raleigh might be one of the best hitters. In fact, he got some top 10 MVP votes for what he was able to do offensively with 34 homers and 100 RBIs last season. This is someone who can be a huge X factor, not just for the Mariners, but for their hopes in the AL West. It's going to be a very competitive division this season, and he will play a big role into determining whether or not this Seattle Mariners team can actually win it and potentially go on a deep run on that side of the bracket. So Cal Raleigh definitely is someone who I'm going to be looking out for. Also, the way he's able to work with such a great staff, perhaps one of the best staffs in the AL West, with Logan Gilbert, George Kirby, Brian Wu at the top of it. So I really feel that Cal Raleigh is one of the most well-rounded catchers to top it all off. Only the Giants' Patrick Bailey had more catcher framing runs. He ranked second at the position last year, so truly talented in all aspects of the game. I would love to see his star rise, even as a Texas Rangers fan, for that matter. But he's not beating out the top 2 guys. I think these top 2 guys are the epitome of the position. One of them had a down year. The other going to have to improve in certain aspects of his game because of that organization, because of what he could mean in a very tight division. A lot of things can happen for this young man. But first, let's start out with number 2 overall, Adley Rutschman. And this is someone who had a down year in a very young but loaded Baltimore Orioles offense. But I still think that this guy has the whole world in front of him as a Baltimore Oriole. Yes, a lot of people are going to question whether or not this young Baltimore Orioles squad has enough talent, has enough potential to break through and actually make a run at the World Series anytime soon. But I think when we look at the roster, there's no doubt you can blame any of their past failures in the postseason in the past couple of years on Adley Rutschman. He's doing his job, improving steadily and mightily at the position. And I really think that the sky is the limit for him and this young team. And they're going to be an important cog in the AL East machine. Because I think in all reality, the AL East has 4 playoff quality teams, and the Baltimore Orioles might just have the most questions asked about them. So Adley Rutschman's kind of pedigree, the Orioles' pedigree as a whole, is going to be called into question a lot more than any other AL East team. And I think that goes to show that this team is one that's going to have to rise to the occasion, and I think that they will. He had an adjusted OPS plus, even in a down year, of 107, so that just goes to show that he's not necessarily declining too heavily one way or the other. So he's still on track to progress in his career alongside this young Orioles team, and I'm really excited for his future. With the number one catcher in the MLB, for an organization that has really developed catchers in the past couple of decades at an overwhelming rate to be some of the best in the MLB, William Contreras of the Milwaukee Brewers. And the Milwaukee Brewers are going to be a very interesting team to watch, right? This is a team that lost a little bit of its depth. They lost their best reliever in Devin Williams. Don't really have one kind of top-end pitcher. Maybe Tobias Myers emerges. And then offensively, very, very young squad, or at the very least relying on a lot of their youth, like guys like Bryce Terang, Sal Frelick in the outfield, Jackson Churio as well. So overall, this Brewers team set up to contend, but not necessarily in terms of perhaps a World Series appearance or a deep run in the NL. But William Contreras has been a big part as to why this team is always going to be in the running in the NL Central. And he is someone who, throughout his career, whether it be with Atlanta or the Brewers, has added a lot of depth as a hitter, whether it be a designated hitter or otherwise. And that's why I think that he is the number one catcher, because of his versatility. He's not necessarily the best in terms of framing, not necessarily the best in terms of defensively, but he does make up for it in terms of his offensive prowess, and I think that the Brewers are going to need a little bit of that production to ensure that they remain the favorites in an NL Central that could be as volatile as ever this year. So that is why he remains at number one on this list. Rutschman could certainly supplant him next year, but I think William Contreras, because of his offensive prowess for this very volatile Milwaukee Brewers team, in my humble opinion, I think he just takes the cake slightly. But let me know what you think about the top 5 catchers. Coming up next, we transition over to the NFL and talk about teams and players who could be parting ties with each other, the top cut candidates, right after this short break.